Violence against women is one of the most pernicious yet pervasive crimes in modern Britain. Around 1 in 4 women have experienced domestic abuse, according to the Crime Survey of England and Wales. But abuse is not usually a one-off event. It's part of a protracted pattern. It starts and builds over a predictable timeline that seems to hold across every country where statistics are available. The more this shocking process can be understood and preempted as it unfolds, the more chance there is of change. The social scientist who has uncovered this and more is Professor Jane Monckton-Smith, Professor of Public Protection at the University of Gloucestershire. She's dedicated the majority of her career to studying the pattern of abuse and exploring its tragically predictable dynamic. She researched and created the Homicide Timeline, a tool for police officers and criminal justice professionals to understand the pattern of domestic abuse that leads to the murder of a woman. Her argument is that domestic homicide is not a crime of passion. Rather, it's the culmination of a timeline of mounting abuse. Already her findings are changing policy, improving lives, and avoiding deaths. Now a respected forensic criminologist, Jane started her career on the front line as a police officer. It's a fascinating career, and I'm sure this is going to be a fascinating conversation. Welcome to the We Society.
Hello, lovely to be here.
Just before we kick off, just lay out the kind of scale of this, because I think that when I was prepping, I couldn't believe some of the numbers. 1 in 4 women have experienced domestic abuse, and then there's the kind of ranging right through to the women who've had mysterious falls and died or been badly injured. Just give us a sense of scale.
Well, the official figures say something around 2 women a week will lose their lives to homicide in this context. Maybe they're just starting to count the suicides now, and they're saying very tentatively maybe another 3 a week suicides.
So what, 3 plus 2, 5?
So that's 5, but that's the official figures. That's not taking into consideration the hidden homicides, the staged homicides, those types of things, which is something that I really do look at and have been looking at for well over a decade now.
A staged homicide?
A staged homicide. Well, if somebody falls from a great height, right. Maybe. We've even had 2 convictions, in fact, for staged car accidents that were actually homicides. So these things are out there, and I can only estimate, obviously, but I would say that we're looking at 10 or more women a week losing their lives because of domestic abuse.
You reel with that. One of your kind of big insights is that this follows a predictable timeline, that it's not a crime of passion, but it's the culmination of a predictable series of events. Can you lay that out?
Yeah, when I first started looking at, I'm a homicide researcher, so I look at lots of different categories of homicide. And when I first looked at domestic homicide, I think I was astonished, outraged, shocked. I couldn't believe the numbers. And when I started digging into it, I couldn't believe the rationalizations for it. I couldn't believe the defenses that were being put forward in court for it. It was obvious that there was a huge misunderstanding. And I really wanted to dig into that and see what was really going on and really attack this crime of passion narrative, because that is saying that these homicides are not predictable, because a crime of passion is something that happens in the moment. The red mist comes down, maybe there's a provocation, but there's no research, there's no evidence to support that narrative. So I really needed to dig into that.
And you discovered there's kind of 8 stages. Man and woman start to kind of live together, be together, and then there's a mappable and predictable progression. Can you spell that out?
Yes, so I looked at, it's called temporal sequencing in academic terms, which is tracking out a temporal journey to a homicide, and they'd used the method in other types of homicides. So I thought, why hasn't this been applied to domestic homicides before? So that was my starting point. So we did a chronology of, in the first tranche, 400 cases to see the similarities in the progression, in the journey. And then once you've got that master chronology, as it were, then you split that chronology where you can identify that the risk is escalating, climbing. So you start at stage 1 and stage 8 is a homicide.
Stage 1 you call what?
The stage 1 is the history of the individual. So we can start to predict who has the most risk of committing a homicide before they've even met their partner.
And stage 2?
Stage 2 is when they meet someone they want to be in a relationship with. And then we move to stage 3, which is the relationship itself.
And what are the actual risks then? I mean, that you're talking about in stage 1 and stage 2?
So at stage 1, you'll be looking at things like what kind of belief system they have, what kind of cultural beliefs, maybe legal, religious beliefs they have.
You're talking about the men here?
I'm talking about mainly men, but it could be women. So we found they kind of fall into 2 categories. So the first category is people who are believers in very traditional gender roles. That doesn't usually cover women.
Right.
But the other group are people who maybe have those personality traits that would lead them to be quite entitled, narcissistic, self-focused, who feel superior perhaps to their partner.
So you then get to stages 3, 4, 5, 6. Just quickly map that out for us.
Right, okay. So stage 3 is a relationship dominated by coercive control. This is the common denominator of every single category of fatality, is this pattern called coercive control. When the control is challenged through a trigger event, which is stage 4, that's when the risk really starts to rise. Stage 5...
And the trigger event could be what? Money, it could be an argument, it could be what? I mean,
The biggest trigger globally is separation, imagined separation or threat of a separation, pulling away from that control. That is in the majority of cases.
So women trying to get out of this,
trying to leave.
It paradoxically intensify
But
the risk.
Some people will choose to stay a bit longer until they're in a position where it's safe to try and leave, because the risk does go up.
And then we've got 5, 6, 7.
So 5 is the response to this trigger, which usually means everything starts to escalate. Most people who are controlling will stop escalating at stage 5. But there are some that move on to stage 6 and 7, which are homicidal ideation and planning.
So you start to think about killing your partner.
Yes, and we don't usually think about that with domestic abuse. We think it's all about somebody not being able to control their temper. It's not that at all.
Yes, because you're talking about this pre-planning. I mean, some of these kind of staged car crashes or falling from heights, it has to be planned and thought through.
Yeah, levels of planning. So when we first did the timeline, one of the biggest resistances to the stages was stage 7, which was the planning, because that absolutely attacks the idea of the crime of passion. And most of the defences, of course, in court will be around losing their temper. So when we said there was planning, some people very much resisted that idea. But we also looked at there's some research that came out of America, and they looked at planning, and 84% of their cases had levels of planning. So this is...
It is common across jurisdictions, isn't it? Now, there was a study by the Young Women's Trust a few years back, which found that, well, it was incontrovertible, really. There was sexism and the likelihood of young women's mental health were kind of closely linked. And that, again, was linked to the chances of kind of being at risk in a coercive relationship. I mean, if you could just lay that out for us, really, it'd be helpful.
I mean, are you asking, is there a type of person who
It's a culture of sexism,
Yes.
And accompanying misogyny. I mean, does that seem? I mean, you think that would be kind of soil in which this stuff would grow.
You're absolutely right. That is the soil in which this grows. So stage one is about your belief system and how entitled you feel to all of the things that society says that you can get from a relationship. You are in charge in the hierarchy. You are at the top of it. Your partner is not allowed to leave you. You are allowed to have some control over them. All of those are grown from sexism, aren't they? So absolutely, that is the soil that domestic homicide is grown in, that sense of entitlement to these things. One of the most surprising things for me in doing this research was finding out the motivation. From the work that I've done, the motivation to kill your partner is a sense of injustice, that you have been wronged and you have an entitlement to act on an injustice. So your partner leaving you is an injustice.
I mean, coercive control was made a criminal offence, wasn't it, in 2015? Has that made a difference to this? I mean, has policing got more kind of alert to the risks and kind of preemptively intervening?
I think policing has made great strides forward, huge strides forward, especially since coercive control was criminalised and lots of other jurisdictions are criminalising coercive control. I don't think the rest of the criminal justice system has kept up.
Right.
Policing has its problems, but so does the rest of the criminal justice system. I think the police are an organisation that's easy to blame because they are at the coalface making absolutely key and critical decisions. But when they do make a decision to take a case forward, to prosecute, to ask for remand, the rest of the system isn't really backing them up. So we can't be comfortable that our problems come from the police.
I mean, the police get a lot of criticism. I mean, you were a former police officer. Mm-hmm. And actually, to what extent, did your experience on the front line pique your interest in this? I mean, you made a career of it. And I have to say, congratulations. I mean, what you've done and the research you've done as a social scientist is, you will have saved lives, you will have improved other lives, you will have made the criminal justice system more kind of sensitive to the whole thing. I mean, that's a thing. And, hats off. But just to say, I mean, having been a police officer, was that, if you hadn't been a police officer and actually encountered this firsthand, would you still have taken the same career path?
Wow, I don't think I probably would. I don't know. I joined the police when I was like 19 years old, and we're talking about back in the very early 1980s. So things were very, very different then. And it was a baptism of fire for me as a woman. And the sexism that I experienced, but not only that I experienced personally, the biggest shock for me was listening to how violence against women was justified and excused by the police force.
And the police kind of buying into that. Is it changing?
Yes, I do. Yes, it is changing, but it's like, Russell and Rebecca Dobash, I mean, they've been researching this kind of thing for years. And the thing they said was, everything's changed and yet nothing's changed. And that is the best answer I can give you. Everything's changed, but nothing's changed.
What does that mean when you say that? I mean, you look at me and I think, what does she really mean by that? You mean that the same kind of, talk in the bar, talk in the restrooms, remains as offensive as ever?
The legislation's changed, the policies, the processes, the outward talk about diversity, the far more women coming in. All of that has changed. The core beliefs about women and sexism, I don't think that's changed at all.
Just a short pause here to tell you about the Academy of Social Sciences. the organisation behind the We Society podcast. I'm Will Hutton, the President of the Academy of Social Sciences, and as I hope you know by now, we are a national body for academics, practitioners and learned societies in the social sciences. As President and host of this podcast, I know just how vital the social sciences are in our society, from education to government, business and finance. Social scientists are at the forefront of tackling the most pressing issues of our time. And in this podcast, we bring you some of their best ideas to shape the way we live. You can find out more about the Academy of Social Sciences work, support us, or read up on our fellows by going to the website acss.org.uk. That's acss.org.uk. Now, back to the conversation. Just trying to get a handle on some of the dynamics of this. I mean, our relationships more transactional these days, online dating. I mean, and with it, a kind of I hesitate to say this, but I didn't get the words right. But actually, transactional sex, and that leads to relationships where this is more likely to happen.
I think there are things about online dating that make relationships more dangerous. One of those things is, of course, you're getting all your information about somebody up front that's been curated in some way, and which means that all of those instincts that we might have when we first meet somebody, they're quite dulled to some extent. So I think that creates problems, a lot of problems, when you first meet someone. But also there's almost this idea that you're looking for the perfect person all the time with online dating, and there'll be another bus along in a minute. So you just keep going. So I think it is very transactional, practically only transactional.
What can be done? I mean, you speak as a social scientist. I mean, you've got amazing analysis and insight. But I mean, what are our tools to fight back?
Yeah, there's a huge question. For me, I think entitlement is the key word for me in addressing all of this. If you take the entitlement away, you take away that idea that somebody has suffered some kind of injustice. So that speaks very specifically to homicide and domestic abuse. Why are we telling or making men believe that they are entitled to control their partner? So where does that entitlement come from? Where do the messages come from that say you are entitled to this? Because I think the numbers are lower with women killing men along this timeline because we, as women, are not taught that we are entitled to control our partners.
Yeah. And what about this, the Andrew Tate phenomena and social influencers who kind of insist upon an idea of maleness that actually kind of feeds into, the entitlement and the control kind of dynamic?
Well, Andrew Tate's an interesting case, not because he's got anything new or special to say, but it's very extreme what he's saying, but it's still accepted by some people as not extreme, but the natural way of things and perhaps the best way of things. But I look at that happening concurrently with what's going on in Afghanistan, where we're seeing extreme ideas of sexism and control of women being acceptable to, well, I say not acceptable to an entire country, but in what other demographic of people would that be acceptable? Would that be acceptable? Would that not cause international outrage, which we are not seeing enough of in Afghanistan? It's because at some level, what Andrew Tate's saying, what's happening with the Taliban, is somewhat acceptable, though extreme.
I'm not going to push back on what you just said, because I mean it's obviously insightful, but I'm not sure that it's not. I mean, no one thinks it's acceptable, actually. It's
no one thinks it's acceptable.
It's just the salience of it's not high enough. That's right.
Where is the
outrage? Yeah.
Outrage.
Yeah,
where is the outrage against what Andrew Tate is saying, for example?
Well, it does exist, but it's not salient enough. It's not kind of high enough up the hierarchy of concerns.
And who's outraged?
It tends to be women.
It tends to be women.
I mean, actually, the older I get, the more I think that, this is not particularly illuminating or insightful thought, but it really is long overdue that, men started looking hard at what maleness means. I speak as, obviously as a man. I just don't, and I have to say, that, two things are true. First of all, that in my lived experience, it's rare to come across the behaviours that, you're describing. But equally, I understand the cultural tinder in which some people kind of spiral off into this. And actually, I don't know what your thoughts are, but there's this amazing case in France last year, Madame Pellicot, who was drugged and raped by her husband. 50, 60, 70 men. Extraordinary. Do you see this part of how, when you do your research and you're thinking about this subject, how broad does it get? How big does it get? How do you reflect on it?
Madame Pellicot, that case is astonishing because they cannot point the finger at the aberrant serial killer, the evil rapist, because these are just ordinary men who all happen to live in the same geographic space. And how did he come across so many of those ordinary men willing to do what they did? Because they didn't fall into that by accident. This is people sharing a belief system. And that's the biggest problem, isn't it?
Yeah. That's certainly what the debate is in France. Yeah. There's a belief system about what you would describe as entitlement. And actually, in a way, does this correspond to your timeline in a way?
Absolutely it does. Absolutely it does. Every single one of those 50 men, shall we say, had that belief system. So they are higher risk for being controlling of their partners and therefore higher risk to commit some form of serious harm.
Would you want to undertake social science research in France and see whether there was a correlation between the men who came forward and raped Madame Pellicot and having a coercive relationship at home?
I think that there will probably be some form of correlation there. Yes, I do.
Is there, as a social scientist going back to this, is there anything about economic and social structures that make this, that we could attend to? Wider social structures, wider economic structures? Or is it just a kind of character disposition and it's across all kind of categories? I'm just trying to kind of think through some kind of response to this.
I think it comes back to entitlement again. How do we get past that? Entitlement. Is that entitlement has to be culturally fed, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It has to be.
I'm very struck by, again, we touched on it earlier about becoming a police officer and encountering this and that leading you in this kind of direction. Were there particular events, experiences you had did you find yourself working in child protection or in areas where there was coercive behaviours and that led you in this direction? Just give me a sense. I think people will be fascinated to hear a bit about you.
The area of business that upset me the most in the police was rape. And that had a profound effect on me, watching how rape victims were spoken to, assessed, and what the agenda was for the service as a whole, the police as a whole. Now, I'm talking back in the early 1980s when things were actually very, very different, allegedly, to the way they are now. But it's still just as difficult to prosecute rape now as it was then. So everything's changed and nothing's changed. That's what I say. We've got a lot more women. We've got a lot more processes. We've got a lot more sensitivity and kindness. But we still haven't got what actually we need is that men are not entitled to do this.
We have to end, but I'm sure that people listening are thinking how compelling it's been, how much more they know about this now than they did before they started listening to it. But they're probably also thinking, I want to do something. I want a response to this. I want to think, how can I personally, or what measures could, civil society, the government take to kind of do more to reduce this? That's what they'll be thinking. And what would you say to them?
The government and the police, after the murder of Sarah Everard, made some promises. Let's just hold them to those promises. Relentless pursuit of perpetrators. Let's just start with that one. They promised it, they put it in writing, and they're not doing it.
What concretely would you do if you could be Prime Minister for a week?
Well, as a criminologist, okay, one of the very early theories that we looked at was about deterrence to crime. And the biggest deterrent, apparently, according to all the philosophers, is the surety of being held to account. That's what I would want to do as Prime Minister. So domestic abuse, rape, sexual assault, violence against women and girls, you will be held to account. No excuses will be made for you. And let's just see how that goes, because that's the biggest deterrent. At the moment, where we've got maybe a 1.3% conviction rate, it's opposite, isn't it? The surety is that you will not be held to account. So let's just tip that balance. And that's what I would want to do as Prime Minister.
Professor Monckton-Smith, thank you very much for a very compelling a very compelling podcast. You've described the scale of this. You've described the 8 stages. You've walked us through that. You explained that these stages exist across countries, and you've examined some of the root causes of it. And you finally said, let's make much more certain than we currently are that perpetrators know that they'll be held to account for this kind of behaviour. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. The We Society is brought to you by the Academy of Social Sciences, who can be found at acss.org.uk. I'm Will Hutton, the producer is Emily Finch, and it's a Whistledown production. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the podcast, leave a comment, share with your colleagues and friends. Thank you so much for listening.